drawing is the one that's really going to challenge us. If this guy over here was pretty simple, this guy was like a little bit difficult. Well, this one over here it's a difficult position, but I intentionally gave you a difficult position because I wanted you to really be forced to think of the box of the head and not get finicky or not get caught up into like any kind of like high rendering. So like any one of us can draw a cube kind of like that. That's something that we can attain, something that a lot of us are comfortable doing. So once you've locked in your cube roughly at this angle right here, well then what I want you to do is I want you to draw the tape on the front of that cube. So there is the eyebrow line, there is, let's say, the base of the nose, and there is the lips. So you'll see as you look at this that things are compressed as they recede away from us. So there's a squishing effect that happens right here. And as you work on something, it's useful, like if you have access to a skull, but you don't need a skull. You could do it with a thing of Pringles, a can of Pringles, where it's long and thin, and you see as you tilt it away from you, all the words get really compressed. Well, it's the same thing with the human skull, right? So as you look at the skull and as it tilts away from you, everything's getting really compressed. That's called, in short, that's perspective. It's foreshortening. And it's very daunting to a lot of artists in their early stages. But if we only keep it in the realm of tape, just bands of tape going across, then we're going to see how we can simplify things and not put too much information. All right, so if I have that all mapped out, maybe what I'll do is I will first put in what I called before like the sunglasses. So the sunglasses are the tilted sunglasses. That's kind of like the eye cavity, like right over here. Now, the width of this is not corresponding directly to the actual width of a skull. So don't get caught up in that. Don't get worried about that, because you don't need to be preoccupied with getting the correct width. This is just an example of how we can attack foreshortening. Now, there is the triangle of the nasal cavity, roughly right there. And maybe I made it a little bit too low. We have it like so, right there. And then the teeth, again, we're just thinking in terms of like dashes. The teeth can go roughly, and to do the teeth, we can return to what is definitely premature here, but you can indicate that there are some teeth just so your eye has almost like a visual reminder of what's going on down here. So you have your teeth roughly mapped out. I should have made these lines a little bit more this way. And now let's jump over to the side of the skull right here. So if this is the base of the cheekbone right here, then as we turn the corner, the base of the cheekbone is going to be roughly right over there. Now I'll do over here, I'll indicate the base of the cheekbone right here. And now I'm going to start chopping. So I'm going to chop the front of the cube right here so that I can have the tilt of the forehead as it tilts away from us. We'll go backwards, and then we can chop the back of this away. So actually what I can do for that is just chop it away like that. And again, chopping the back of the skull here. So I realize how bizarre this drawing looks, but when you see the other drawing that I do, that's more highly developed, it'll make sense to you why we force ourselves to think in such a simple schematic way. And for that, that is pretty much all that I need for this stage of the drawing. Maybe I'll refine some of these junctures where things are meeting just a little bit. And there is the downward tilt of the skull. I'm going to have this in my mind the entire time that I'm working, and I'm going to be sure as I get to the very complex passage with everything kind of like smashing into each other, I'm going to keep those bands in mind. So jump over to the next stage of our drawing. Okay, so now as we jump into a difficult position, you are going to watch me kind of evolve an idea. And with evolving this idea, I'm really I'm I'm really fixed on this one approach of having this like fluid, malleable attack on any drawing or something like that, where I'll shift shapes around, and provided I don't really have to lock in a specific size, I'll change the size of something, I'll change the angle of something, I'll look for different anchor points. Like I'll use the bottom of the jaw, I'll use the top of the head, and then maybe I'll choose to see it differently. And when I'm doing this, what I'm doing is I am, as best I can, I'm trying to establish in a linear fashion what the major plane changes are. So there's the plane changes on the outside, we call those the external contour. There are the plane changes on the inside, the abrupt ones, such as the plane change from the bridge of the nose to the nasal socket. That's really, a dramatic plane change. And so I notate that with like a triangle that's like clipped at the top. And you see I put in beyond the jawline, I put in the teeth line. And then I return to like the brow ridge. And there are scientific names for all these things. And in future lessons, I will be able to get into like the specific terminology. But for now, suffice to say, to work on the eye socket, called the zygomatic process, the eye socket. And there's the corner of the eye socket that kind of juts out a little bit to the left. I use that as an anchor point. And if I can lock in a point like that, then I can figure out, okay, then the cheekbone turns at this angle, then the nasal cavity overlaps the cheekbone. So I'm looking for a lot of its linear information and its lines overlapping. And that's the way that I plot my course through this I'll call it difficult terrain, because the skull turned downwards is so much more difficult to most artists than is the skull, at an angle that's, let's say, full frontal or in profile or something of that sort. But that's why I actually like difficult angles in drawing way more than the everyday angles. It just brings more interest to the eye. There are new and surprising things. So you'll notice that I haven't gone into anything regarding mass, but I've kept everything linear. Again, I'm plotting points. I'm comparing, let's say, where the outside of the eye socket falls right here, and I'm plotting how that will relate to the back of the head, how that will relate to the jaw. Everything speaks the one thing to the other. And so with the more information that I get down, I gain a clearer picture. But you'll also notice that the way in which I use my eraser, it's, traditionally, pencils are additive and erasers are subtractive. And I don't even know if subtractive is a word, but I just made it into a word. But I actually regard erasers as being part of the process that adds, in that you can move things around, you can lighten, you can pull away, there's so many things that you can do with an eraser to push a drawing further along. And for me, the biggest thing is that it's the malleability, and it enables me to rethink a whole entire passage and to explore a drawing with abandon. And you'll see that in a lot of my work. I'm constantly changing my ideas. I'm constantly in the early stages rethinking where something might sit. I'm expanding the size of something, and I really do it with kind of like an abandon. And so as I'm working on the drawing, I'm being very mindful of, as ever, you hear me repeat the same things over and over, but they go through my head over and over. So I feel like it's worthwhile just returning to. But I can't let the details overwhelm the unity of the whole effect. I'm always trying to balance the forest and the trees, where I want the trees to be subordinated to the forest. I want the forest to first and foremost be the thing that stands out and the unity of that effect. And then the details of the trees are within that unity of the whole. So it's a delicate dance. I'm not claiming that I ever arrive or I do it particularly well, but it's a goal of mine, and I keep it in the front of my thoughts constantly. And so you'll see that I have laid in a common value across all the shadow areas. I've done very little differentiation. Like there's some hinting at halftones, but generally speaking, it was like one blanket value across the whole thing. In the early stage of putting in any areas that are in shade, I'm really careful to not get too caught up with, okay, this is really dark. Okay, this is really bright. Okay, this is gentle halftone. Like I try not to think along those lines. But generally speaking, I'm just pushing light away from dark. There are exceptions. You can see actually right above the eyes on the forehead, I put in a halftone there. But more or less, what I'm trying to do is focus all of my attention on pushing the broad light away from the broad dark, and then unifying all the shadow areas into pretty much one cohesive whole. And I know as I talk about these things, sometimes perhaps it can just be wearisome to hear me repeat the same things, but it's helpful to think of shade on any object not necessarily as being a thing in and of itself. Like everything is dark until light hits it. And this skull would be in absolute darkness, save for the light which is striking it from above. And so rather than thinking of where the shade goes, I think of where the light can't reach. I think of the angle of the light. I think of the planes of the form. And I say to myself, well, if the light is coming from overhead in this really drastic angle, then the light won't be able to hit the chin. The light won't be able to hit beneath the cheekbone on the jaw, on the back end of the jaw. And so by thinking that way, by thinking of light almost as having matter, and I kind of laugh because I listen to physicists and different scientists talking about the properties of light, and they lose me early on because I just don't have the verbal engineering physics language to keep up with their conversations. But I'm really interested in it. And, they'll say, well, does light have mass? Is it made of particles? It's interesting because black holes can bend light into their gravity, right? So does that mean that it actually is made up of particles, or is it little energy packets of, what is light? I could say that as an artist, I choose to see light in terms of little particles, in the same way that water is made up of little particles. And so in the same way that water molecules will strike a surface when it comes out of a hose, light particles in Kevin's artistic brain will emit from a light source and strike an object. So again, don't quote me on the science of that. I have absolutely no clue what the consensus is in the scientific community. But it is a peek into my brain to see how I think about these things, how I myself choose to conceptualize light so that I can manipulate the light to the effect that I want. And that's really an important thing to pause on. We want to be composers of our own art forms. I don't regard myself as being a documentarian, where I'm just documenting what has taken place. But instead, I consider myself to be a composer who is almost creating a variant on a theme. So this skull in front of me, I'll never be able to capture this amazing skull in all of its just its stunning engineering design. I mean, I'll never be able to capture it in all of its power. But this is my variant on the theme of that skull. And so I proceed with that sense of, well, if I'm the composer of this, then I can think of myself as possessing tools, and I utilize those tools as I see fit and when I see fit, so that I, as the creator, can come up with my own system. And so that's a really liberating concept, that you are a composer, you take the light source and you shine it down as you see fit. And I'll give you an example of how this is really important in just one seemingly far-flung area of painting, and that would be plein air painting. So I go out and I paint plein air outdoors, and I set up my easel, and it's a beautiful sunny morning, and then the angle of the light in the sky changes. But I like the light that's earlier and lower in the sky. Well, I can choose to reject the light that's in front of me and still run with the light that was there 45 minutes before. So I'm choosing to light my subject as I see fit. And I'm doing that as an artist all the time. I'm electing to put in the elements that I want to see, and I'm choosing to ignore the things that I just pretty much, they don't fit my composition. We are composers, we're not documentarians. So that's very much integral to my philosophy in drawing and painting. Other artists, there are plenty of artists out there who would vehemently disagree with me, and I would have to say that I don't think that either one of us would be right or wrong. I'm not a relativist by any means, but when it comes to the act of creation, one artist would have fidelity to nature being the supreme objective, and trying to remove themselves as much as they possibly can from the artistic expression, and that's valid. For me, I kind of do the dance, and I think of Andrew Wyeth when he was speaking about the creative act, and he said, and I'm going to butcher this, and forgive me for paraphrasing it, but he said, hold a mirror up to nature. Don't overstate it, don't understate it, do it just right. And that's my goal. I hold a mirror up to nature, but I know that I'm not actually capturing nature. Nature in all of its tremendous glory, creation as I view it, it exists, and I merely am holding up my reflective surface to it. To a certain extent, I am emulating it.